Any questions? Go ahead. It was about equally divided because both of the kingdoms were in. And then of course, the southern kingdom went on for a little over, I don't remember how many, about 100-something years after, 130 years after that, the northern kingdom was done. So you still had even more prophets that were sent to the southern kingdom even after that time. So, but anyway, it's a good study. I'm looking forward to it. It allows me to research some stuff and find some stuff that I wasn't aware of, and that's always good. So, having that said, we'll go ahead and start with our class today. I don't have anything from this morning. Donna was she was wanting to go ahead. We baptized her a little earlier than I thought we were going to, but she wanted to go ahead and take care of that. They wanted to go ahead and get the kids home, so we went ahead and did it. I apologize if you came back for that, but it was one of those. Could we go ahead? Yeah, we'll go ahead and do it. So anyway, we're going to finish up with the parables today. Anybody got a problem with finishing up parables today? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and turn to Luke 19, verses 11 through 28. Luke 19, 11 through 28. Last week we talked about the talents, one of the most frequently referenced parables that we have, right? Parable of the talents, the 5, the 3, and the 1, right? 5, the 2, and the 1. Right? So, yeah, 5, 2, and 1. One got 5, and the other one got 2, and the other one got 1. And the 5 and the 2 multiplied it, and then the 1 hit it in the ground. I think we wore that one out last week, so we're going to get started with this one. This one's a little bit more, and it actually combines the elements of 2 of the other parables. Okay, so Luke 19, verse 11, and I'll go ahead and read this with us. Now, as they heard these things, he spoke what? Another parable. Now, we're about to the end of the parables, all the parables that he actually spoke. Now, as they heard these things, he spoke another parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. So we have an impression here that he is going to give them this parable so that they would know that this was not an instantaneous thing. It wasn't going to occur even while he was living on this earth. And we find this by the way that he spoke, speaks the parable. It goes to show that we can't assume anything, can we? We don't assume anything. We find out the truth and we apply the truth. That's all. All right? So let's look at this. Thereof he said, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. Now, right off the bat, who do we get an impression, right? We have a nobleman. All right. The idea of nobleman means this is someone of noble birth. This is someone who has a regal. There's a regency to them, right? This is a nobleman, someone who's of high standing. Who do we know from the parable? Who do we know this is supposed to be? Jesus Christ, as it is typically, right? But he went into a far country to receive a kingdom for himself, all right? But also to do what? To return, to go back from whence he came. So he left a particular place. He went to receive a kingdom to himself, but then to return. All right. So he called 10 of his servants and delivered to them 10 minas. He said to them, do business until I come. But his citizens, now the citizens are to be understood as separate from what? His servants. All right. So let's look at this. We got the servants. And we got the citizens. All right. The servants would be whom? Let's just say this. This is disciples. Disciples also took into account the apostles. The apostles were disciples, but not all the disciples were apostles, right? Only 12 of the apostles. That's how they were numbered. But we understand here that the servants would be those who would be disciples of Jesus Christ. And of course, in this case, he gives a number of 10. The 10 has absolutely nothing to read anything more into it other than the fact that there was a particular number of them. So he says, he gives them these 10 minas, and he said to them, do business until I come. So much in the same way, what parable are we looking at in regards to this one? Where do we see this? Talents. Very good. The 10 minas. Talents. All right. Whether it be numeric or whether it be physical talents, makes absolutely no difference. We are entrusted with something by God, by Jesus Christ, and we are to do what with it? Make fruitful it's appearing in our lives. That is essential. I mean, I can't make it any more clear than that. And if you're watching, I want to make sure that people understand. Simply the having of a talent makes no difference. The talent only makes a difference if we use it. Those talents that those servants were entrusted to made absolutely no difference if they hadn't used them. Now, this is the thing, as we said in the parable of the talents, they had until the master came back. Same way with us today. We're entrusted with this talents, and we have a lifetime, however long that lifetime is, we have a lifetime to make use of the talents with which we are entrusted. And they are entrusted to us. All right, they're given to us. They're not inherent in us. They are given to us to do. All right, same as the example is here. All right. So then he says, "Do business until I come." But his citizens, who are the citizens? The Jews. The Jews. The Israelites, so to speak. Of course, they weren't Israelites at this point. There was no really longer a nation. It's Judea. So they were the Jews. The Jews hated him. His own countrymen, his own brothers and sisters, his own kinsmen hated him. So he had the citizens that didn't want him. What did they say? They said they hated him, and they did what? Verse 14. His citizens hated him and did what? Saying, they sent a delegation after him saying, "We will not have this man to reign over us." They had no idea what they were doing, did they? They were clueless. They were ignorant. Ignorance, though, however, is no excuse. Their ignorance will not make excuse for them when they have to answer for their ignorance. So he says the idea of sending a delegation. You know, we could understand that certainly in a physical standpoint. This man goes and he's to receive this kingdom, and they send a delegation after him saying, "We don't want this man as king." We could understand the physical standpoint, but as far as a spiritual standpoint, how do we understand this? How do we send a delegation after Jesus Christ saying, "We will not have this man as our king"? How do we do that? Huh? What's that? Elections? No, okay, let me say, for example, we taking this as the parable that it is, how do we say that we do not want Jesus Christ to reign over us? Okay, we don't do what he asks us to do, but what else? Okay, we don't follow the command for salvation. What else? We install another king. You know, what's that? Okay. For example, what did the people do when Pontius Pilate came out and said, "I can release either this Jesus or I can release this murderer into your midst"? And what did the people cry out? "Give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas. Give us Barabbas." We make a choice one way or the other. We're going to make a choice. Sometimes we don't even realize we're making the choice. You know, the world doesn't realize it's making a choice. They just don't choose Christ. But in not choosing Christ, what have they done, essentially? They've made a decision. They've made their choice. Their choice just wasn't Christ. See, they think that they can have neither one. Well, I don't want to serve Satan, but I don't want to serve God. And they don't understand in their ignorance, they've already chosen. They've already chosen. Much like that fellow I talked about this morning. You know, he said, I'd sell my soul for $500, whatever it was he would do. And he didn't understand that when he said that, he already did. His sins, that soul is lost forever and ever. Forever and ever. All right? So here we have this instance where we have these people, these own citizens. And part of it is they did not understand what kind of king he was going to be. All right? They were ignorant of him. He wasn't the kind of king they thought he would be. What kind of king were they hoping he would be? Glorious king, right? One that would rise up, reestablish the beautiful kingdom of God. They would once again be God's people in the truest sense of the word. He would throw off the yoke of the Roman oppressors. He would establish the kingship of David forever and evermore. Jerusalem would again be the shining city on the hill, and instead of the shabby, run-down Jerusalem that we know of in the first century. That's what it had come to. The temple was a shadow of its former self. All of the beautiful parts of it had been pulled away and taken away as plunder by conquering forces. The walls that were once solid rock are now just basically, they did the very best they could, but it wasn't what it once was. And they were hoping he would come and reestablish Jerusalem in the truest sense of the word. But that wasn't the kind of king he was coming to establish, was it? That wasn't the kind of kingdom. He was coming to establish a spiritual kingdom rather than a physical kingdom. So what did these people say? We won't have this man to reign over us. He's not the kind of king we thought he was going to be. And to the point that they sent a delegation after him, saying, we won't do it. And essentially what that's saying is they rejected him. And that's what we read about. We always see where his own people rejected him forever and ever. All right, so in verse 15, we get an understanding here. So it was that when he returned, having received the kingdom, he then commanded these servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Now, here's the interesting thing. He goes back, even after these people sent the delegation saying we will not have king. Does that remove him as king? No, the king wasn't. The people were not. It was not the people that were going to give the kingdom to him. It was his father that was going to give the kingdom to him. So the people, even in all of their protestations, all of their refusal to accept him as king, at his name, what? Every knee shall bow. He is a sovereign, whether we agree to accept him as sovereign or not. So even after all of this, he still goes back to receive his own. So he says, I'm going to go to the servants that I've entrusted with the talents, and now you have to do what? You have to give an account. You have to give an account for what I've given you to use. So then came the first, Master, your mina has earned 10. He said to him, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in a very little. Have authority over 10 cities. Cities makes absolutely no difference. The point is, you've been entrusted with a little. You've done well with it. Now I will entrust you with even more. That's the end. That's the end result of this parable. So it sounds very much like the parable of the talents, right? You had 5. Master, I gained 5 more. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. Now I'll make you master over many things. Okay, so he's basically repeating himself in this parable, using a little bit different language. And the second came saying, Master, your mina has also earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, you also be over 5 cities. You see where it is. They've been faithful in a little, now he will give them much. The reward is far greater than the original amount that they were entrusted with. It's the way with us even today. All right? You think about how little what he's given us to do. What is the reward for having been faithful in the small thing of this life? What's the reward? Huge reward, right? Eternal life. Crowns, spiritual crowns, but still a crown of gold. All right? We will stand before the throne of God, the very throne of God. We will be higher than the angels. So, the reward is great, especially relative to the amount that we've been entrusted with. It's huge. It's incredible. So he said, then another, in verse 20, then another came, saying, Master, here is your mina, which I have kept put away in a handkerchief. For I feared you. Well, this sounds familiar, doesn't it? This sounds real familiar. Well, who is this in regards to the first parable? Parable of the man with the 1 talent, right? For I feared you, because you are an austere man. That's a polite way of saying what? You're hard. You're a hard master. You're a taskmaster. You do not accept halfway. He says, you collect what you did not deposit, and you reap what you did not sow. What does that mean? Because we hear that as the servant tells these things. What does that mean? Okay, but how does that play into Christ? Did Christ baptize anyone? Christ work in the kingdom? Christ didn't work in the kingdom. The kingdom hadn't been established yet. Who did the work? Servants did the work. And in that aspect, he's correct. Jesus is going to reap where he did not sow. There's nothing wrong with that. The idea of not reaping where you did not sow, he owns the field. He's entitled to the reward. He's entitled to the surplus. He's entitled to the fruit. That's who we render to. We are like, in the old words, we're like sharecroppers. We've been given a portion of land to till and to plant and to reap and to sow and to do all of those things. But who does it truly belong to? What we produce, who does it truly belong to? It belongs to Christ, because He's the owner of the field. We're workers. And we need to accept that aspect of our lives, is the fact that we are workers for Christ. We have our existence through Him, not because of anything we've done. We have our existence through Him. So when Christ says, I want you to do this, do we say, well, what's in it for us? We already know what's in it for us. We are to do as we've been told. It's hard for us to do that sometimes, isn't it? Because we're sometimes very proud, and we do not like the idea of taking orders from anyone. There's a reason a lot of people don't want to go into the military. They don't want to be barked at. They don't want to be yelled at, screamed at, told to do something, especially when sometimes it makes absolutely no sense to do that. I want you to dig a hole here, and I want you to fill in this hole here. Well, for us on the outside, we look at that and think, well, that's ridiculous. Well, there's a reason that it's done, but we chafe under that kind of authority. I don't want to go to work in some 9-to-5 job because I don't want to have to punch a clock. I don't want to. There's a reason that people pack up and they move to the far corner of Alaska and build a cabin for themselves, and there they sit, because guess what? They don't want to deal with authority. So it is something that it chafes many of us. And that's understandable. But when we realize who our taskmaster is, when we realize who the master is, and He tells us that His yoke is easy and His burden is light, then when we start realizing why we do what we do and who we're doing it for, the hard work that before we would chafe under now becomes, it's not quite so hard. It's not quite so difficult. And when we realize that when we do this, when we've been faithful in this small thing, the reward is twice as great, 10 times as great, 1,000,000 times greater than the trouble that we think that we're taking with all of this really kind of melts away, and we're left with what we really have, that we're rendering due service. Yeah, it's somebody else's land. We just work it. We just have to pack up and go somewhere else. And that was the way it was. And that is the way that it is. We are given this place. We've been entrusted with something. Our job is to make of it what we can and what we will. But we're certainly not supposed to be like the man with the one that comes up. He's got it, he's wrapped it up in a handkerchief, and here it is. He said, you see, I didn't lose it. I didn't do anything with it, but I didn't lose it. And expecting, what is he expecting? Oh, congratulations. Thank you. Well, you gave me back what I gave you. That wasn't the point. The point was I gave you this so that you could do something with it, accomplish something. And you haven't accomplished anything. You kept it safe, but I would rather you have worked hard with it and lost it than to keep it safe in a handkerchief and give me back nothing. You haven't shown any kind of initiative, any kind of effort. And so it will be with us. And look what he says. I feared you because you are an austere man. I love that word. You collect what you did not deposit, and you reap what you did not sow. And 23 says, and he said to him, out of your own mouth I will judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, collecting what I did not deposit and reaping what I did not sow. Why then did you not put my money in the bank, that at my coming I might have collected at least with interest? Now, this is a repeat of the parables, right? He said to him, and he said to those who stood by, take the mina from him and give it to him who has 10. But they said to him, Master, he has 10. They're trying to say, but he already has 10. He said, that's not the point. I'm taking it away from the wicked one, and I'm giving it to the one who has shown effort. He has shown promise. He has shown some sort of accomplishment. And believe me, there are going to be so many people who are going to stand before God, and they are going to be utterly humiliated when they stand and they can say nothing more than, well, I became a Christian. Well, what did you do? I became a Christian. But what did you do? Remember, works. That's the only thing we have for God. That's the only thing visible we have, are works. There are going to be those who are going to stand before God, and they're going to have nothing to show for it, nothing. They've not talked to anyone because they were fearful. They haven't haven't preached the gospel. because they didn't know enough. And they'll give every excuse, as this servant did. Give every excuse in the world why they didn't do what they did, but will excuses avail them of anything when they have to stand before God? Excuses won't hold water. There is no excuse. Everyone here probably knows at least 2 or 3 people that have had hard times in their life. They have had a tough life, but they still make themselves of service to God and find a way. There's plenty to do. But we look and say, well, I'm really busy, and my family pulls me away, and I have to take care of them, and this, and then we start, and once again, it's funny because even as human beings, we hear excuses and we say, that's not going to hold water. I know I can see through that, and God is going to be able to see through it as well. He's far more intuitive than we are. He sees through that better than we do. All right, verse 26. For I say to you that to everyone who has will be given, and from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. Basically the same thing. What do we have? We have Christ. What do we have? Everything. We have Christ, we have everything. But if we don't have Christ, what do we have? Even our soul will be taken away from us. There we are. Tells us there's only 2 things, right? There's only two courses of action, right? We're either in Christ and we have it all, or we're outside of Christ and we have absolutely nothing. That's it. There's no middle ground. Verse 27, but bring here those enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them and slay them before me. So now he's dealt with the servants. First thing he did was he dealt with the servants. The wicked servant is going to be cast away. The righteous servant, the profitable servant is going to be elevated to a position of status. And now he's dealt with them. Now what is he going to do with those who did not want him at all, who's rejected him utterly? And what is he going to do to them? He says, slay them before me. When we stand before God, there are 2 courses of action, right? One is that Jesus is going to confess our name before his Father. And the other one is that Jesus will deny us before his Father. And who is he speaking of here? Those who will be denied. That's who he's talking about. Okay. Parable. Any questions about the parable? It's really, the parables are very simple to understand. We understand from of course, the parable of the talents, we see where all of this comes into play. And then we also see, what's the other parable that we read about in this one? Parable of the vine dressers, right? Where the master sends his son, or sends a servant after servant after servant, and they reject the servants. And then he sends his son. He says, surely they'll respect my son. And he says, no, if we kill him, we'll receive the inheritance for ourselves. So they killed the son. And that's really what we have here. They didn't want him to reign over them. They rejected him. In the first parable, they rejected him and they killed him. In this one, they just simply rejected him. They would not submit to his authority. And that's who he's speaking of here. When he talks about those enemies of mine, those who will not submit to the authority of Christ. That's the essential. That's the nature of it. All right, any questions? Because we're going to get to the last one. Anyone? Gone? All right, the last one, last parable, Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. This one is very simple, and there's not much. I've actually done a sermon on this one, so I don't know that there's too much that I can add to it. It's the concept of when the Son of Man comes back, when Jesus comes back in his glory, what's going to occur. And we know that he will be coming back, and it will be at a time of God's choosing. And it will be unannounced. There's no events that we can research and see leading up to the second coming of Jesus, no matter what the charlatans might want us to believe and buy from them. There's no one who can determine when Jesus Christ is coming back. I don't care how you look at it, and there's no current event that we can say, oh, here it is. It's not there. It's just not there. All right, so let's look at this. Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and when is this? This is the second coming, right? This is not a day of the Lord. This is the second coming, the second advent of Jesus Christ. And all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides what? Sheep from the goats. I'm not sure why sheep are better than goats, but in this case, it's just showing a division. You don't want the two animals housed together, so you're going to separate the sheep from the goats, mainly because sheep are a little bit more timid. They don't do well when you've got something as temperamental and sometimes as spirited as a goat. You don't want those together. So he's dividing them up. That's essentially the nature of it, okay? So he's going to divide up his sheep from his goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Once again, not sure why the goats are the bad guys, but the goats are going to be on the left-hand side. The sheep are going to be on the right. And the king is going to say to those on the right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Now here we get into the idea of what does Jesus require from us? What does he want to see out of us while we have our time? Here it gets back into the idea of the talents. He gave each of them talents. They were supposed to do something with those talents. Well, what are they supposed to do with those talents? Well, we're going to see right here. He said, verse 35, "For I was" what? "Hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me," all right, "I was and you did what? Took me in. I was, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me." How many people, I just can't go to the hospital. I just can't go to the hospital. Hospitals make me uncomfortable. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me or visited me. Okay. So, is this an exhaustive list of all the things that we're supposed to do as Christians? No, not even close. There are so many things that we're supposed to do as simply part of our Christian life, but Jesus really has broken it down into the very simplest of components. What do we do? We provide the needs for people who are without. That's it. Is that simply bound up only in the Christian? No. We just had some people come to the pantry. We had some people come to the pantry, and we sent them on their way with plenty of food. We were able to do that. We didn't say, "Well, are you a member of the Church of Christ? I need to see some sort of an identification before we can give you anything." We don't ask people where they go to church. We don't ask people what they believe. We could have somebody as a just absolute vehement atheist. They're hungry. So you know what we're going to do as Christians? We're going to give them some food. We're going to do what we can for them. We think about all these people. I know for a fact that Brother Flynn, when he passes out those clothes in South Africa, they're not all going on the backs of members of the Lord's church. I dare say probably half of those clothing is going to end up on the backs of people they've never set foot in the church before, never set foot in the building, never heard a gospel message. But what does it do? It shows them who reigns over our lives. God has told us to feed the hungry. God has told us to give water to the thirsty. He's told us to clothe the naked. He didn't say, "Hey, check their credentials before you give them." He says, "Let us do good unto all men as much as is possible for us to do so, but especially those of the household of faith." Well, that takes consideration both people, right? Members of the church and those outside of the church. Both of those are in need. Our responsibility is to provide those needs as much as it's possible for us to do so. Somebody's having a problem with their mortgage. We can't pay their mortgage off, but we can help them. We can do as much as we possibly can for them, both individually and as a congregation. And that's another thing. Just simply because the congregation is doing something doesn't relieve the individual of the responsibility as well. And I think that's a common thought for a lot of folks. Well, the church is helping. But what can we do individually? What can I do for these people? It didn't say the church is supposed to go visit someone in prison. It says that I'm supposed to go visit someone in prison. So, okay, continuing on. All right, so he says all of these things. He gives us a groundwork, he gives us a framework, a skeleton, so to speak, of the things that we're to do, the works that we're to do as New Testament Christians. All of these things. This is even before the church comes into establishment. He's telling us what people who claim to be God's people are to do for each other and for others. So verse 37 says, "Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" All right, honest question, because you know what? A lot of folks are going to do these things, and they don't. The idea here is that Jesus is personification here. When you did that, and he tells them this, he said, "The king will answer and say to them, Assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to the least of these brethren," what? You did do it to me. If you did it to my brethren, you did it to me. This brings up an entirely different a concept here, though. What does that mean? Who's Christ? Who are Christians? Followers of Christ. What are we? We're supposed to be Christ. We're supposed to be, in the term of Christ, our Christian, little Christ. That's who we're supposed to be. And that's what he's saying here. If you did it to these, the least of my brethren, you're doing it to me. You are doing it to me. And that's how he counts it. It's as if you did it to me. You know, if you ever, especially if you're a parent, and somebody does something really nice for your child, just is very kind to your child, don't you feel like they've done it? They've basically done it to you. It feels like they've actually done something for you when they did something for your child, or your spouse, your family member. You know, if you've ever had a family member sick and they've been in the hospital, and the caretakers just take very good care of me. To you, it's like they did it to you. But that's essentially what Jesus is saying here. If you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. And then verse 41, here's where the other shoe drops, though. This is the bad part. Then he will say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, ye cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Once again, the devil's going to suffer the punishment as well. That's who hell was created for. It was prepared for them. We're going to take part in it if we don't do what we're supposed to do. And how do we find that out? Verse 42. For I was hungry, and you what? Gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not take me in. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they will also answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to the one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. So there's two ways to look at this. One, they made no effort whatsoever to do anything for anyone. They were very selfish with their time and their energies and their talents, and they did absolutely nothing. Or they did not do it the way that Jesus prescribes for it to be done, in his name. They may have done it and taken the glory for themselves. How many people have you seen do that? They do something, and I've always found it very interesting. You've got these guys that, the press was all there when this
could have been talked to individually. And it's against the power working. Deliverance from evil. Yeah. And just on and on and on and on.
Well, yeah, it is, and it's even more incredible that even after 2,000 years, I think model written by clearly possible kids, that people disregard it, people ignore it, misinterpret it, misunderstand it. Sometimes they'll certainly treat it better in there. But part of that is the fact that human beings are wisdom is not always. We trust ourselves too much. And we trust in our own intentions. We trust in nature. Turn it back on us. When we think about prison, when we think about it in terms of prison, we're in and as it was back then, so it is, and if somebody acts on our behalf, what's going to happen? We're going to be permanently locked in that prison. That we're dying in that prison. Unless somebody acts on our behalf, how is that? Well, it's one thing we have to keep the cross so that we can be released from the prison. But if we are still ignorant of Christ, we're as locked in that prison as we were in the beginning. We have to be conscious, we have to be aware that there's a Redeemer that has already basically unlocked the door. We just have to push it open. Okay? So here we have this. When we talk about what Jesus says, basic framework, there's a lot of things we can take from it. The idea of hungry, thirsty, naked, prison, and sick. Every single one of those has something to do with our life. Sick. What was Jesus called? What did the sick need? What about those who are naked? What does it say we're going to be clothed with when we become that? Remember, About thirsty. What did Jesus say to the woman at the well? If you knew who this was, you would ask him for living water. Hungry. What is the bread of life? Every single one. We can look at it literally. There are people who are hungry, literally physically hungry. They're going to go out food. They're thirsty to eat water. That concept, it would make, that makes a whole lot more sense, especially in that where they live. The idea of water being fresh, well, that water could be brought up. And when you would come to somebody's well, it was expected that you would offer that water. Wells were closely guarded, and they were very, very important. But that idea of part of hospitality, but the idea of being naked, it's hard for us to comprehend that. I'm not having clothes. But you know what? When you were poor today, are far better dressed than the poor in the time of Christ. You might have one article of clothing. You might have one article of clothing for every single day. Because that's all you have. You barely wash what you have. All these things would sometimes they make a little bit more sense in the context of when they were written. But every single one of these are physical needs that you don't have to prison. When you went to prison, if your family didn't feed you, they didn't feed you. They didn't bring you food. Your family had to come and visit you and bring you food. If you didn't, you didn't eat. All right. So every single of these is yes, an actual physical need. Look at the you're in prison. Somebody's in prison. Gates unlocked. They're going to put on the door. If we're hungry, what kind of food do we give? Jesus asked, all right, let's go to the third. Because Jesus asked for a cup of water. The idea of being naked. When we stand before God, of course, the idea of your crown was clothed with robes of white, our garments of white, and our cloths of white. Every single one of those has different connotations. All these are what we're in. We come to God. So we have another aspect. Anything else? Anybody want to add?
We would appreciate
Yep, that is, you see what there is, and it's beautiful, isn't it? I kind of like the comforts of home. I love to see it. All right, anything else? I agree with it. If there's anything, anybody wants notes or anything like that, I think we've covered it pretty thoroughly, but who's been keeping their notebook? Does anybody even know where their notebook is? At least you know where it is. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. All right. If there's nothing further, we're going to go ahead and follow the invitation. Three to two. First verse of 3.
Anyone here to take the Lord's Supper?
Do we have anybody?